Hello and welcome to Subject to Change with me, Russell Hogg. This is part 2 of a 2-part series that Jonathan Clements and I are doing on the Christian century in Japan. In last week's episode, we heard about how the Portuguese arrived in Japan back in 1543, and they were carrying with them clocks, guns, and Jesus. Well, they were carrying with them the Society of Jesus, at least, the Jesuits. And at first it goes really well, with the local lords falling over themselves to trade with the Portuguese, and not just to convert to Christianity themselves, but to take with them their retainers in their thousands and in their tens of thousands. And that's the beginning of Japan's Christian century. But quite soon, it all starts to go wrong, and as Japan begins to put the civil wars behind it, the Christians are trusted less and less. So they're asking themselves, who is this Pope? And is he really more important than the shogun? And we heard about shipwrecks, with the cargo being nicked by the locals. We heard about bitter fights in Macau, and eventually about an entire ship being attacked and blown up. So as we start this episode, the Tokugawa clan has finally got control and has put the Christians pretty firmly in their place. So take it away, Jonathan.
Japan is supposedly unified. The Tokugawa family are in power and will hang on to that power for the next 250 years. They have to, as far as they can see, get rid of the ladder that allowed them to ascend. And part of that is removing the influence of Christians from Japan, because they are very suspicious of the Christians as a sort of fifth column for foreign interference. Down in the south of Japan, particularly in the Amakusa and Shimabara area, there are lots of Christian samurai who've retired and become farmers. Arima in particular is a heartland of Christian activity, and the tide has turned so strongly against Christianity by this point that the apostate ruler of Arima Naozumi, says he doesn't even want to run his own province anymore, even though he grew up in Hara Castle in Shimabara. He's like, no, I don't want to be part of this anymore. I want to be transferred. So he's moved out, and before long, the Matsukura family are put in charge of Shimabara. And they are very keen to impress the shogun. And they are very keen to be... this is probably one of the last reassignments of land there's going to be, because there will be no more wars. The shogun says there will be no more wars. So there won't be any battlefield promotions anymore. You know, if someone is, put in the right position now, they could conceivably stay there until the end of time. So the Matsukura family getting control of the Shimabara area is possibly their last chance to be the Japanese aristocracy. And so Lord Matsukura, in my book I call them old and young Matsukura, the two Matsukura lords, and the reason is there are so many people with the same name in this period that it gets... This
is the problem with all stories, where Europeans are not familiar with the names. It's so easy to get muddled up.
So old Matsukura comes in, and he has a very deliberate scheme to run Shimabara well. And this has two features. One of them is that he's trying to impress the shogun back in Edo. He's trying to impress the Tokugawa family with how good he is at running stuff. The other one is that I think he still has an eye on foreign trade. He still has an eye on the possibility of ships of merchants arriving, because Japan is not shut away yet to the rest of the world. There are still foreign traders showing up in Hirado and in Nagasaki. There are still Chinese ships putting in. There are still Dutch traders coming in. And so I think old Matsukura very deliberately is trying to set up Shimabara as the perfect location where any shogun who knows what he's doing, he's going to go, you know what we should do? We should send all of the foreign ships to Shimabara, because it's this sheltered port and it's right round inside the Ariake Sea. It's going to keep us safe from pirates. It's the ideal place. One of the problems with Shimabara is that Hara Castle, which is the main ducal seat, as it were, is an outmoded location. It's too close to the sea. It's vulnerable to bombardment from ships and from the land, and it doesn't have a very good command of the view. What old Matsukura does is he decides to build a mega castle even though the shogun's been saying, I want people dismantling their forts. He pushes the envelope a little bit by building a mega castle at Shimabara itself. And there is a castle there today at Shimabara, but it's a relatively modern replica. It's still huge, but it's not as huge as the one that Matsukura built. He deliberately built a castle that was incredibly tall, and I've stood on the battlements of Shimabara Castle, and it's true, because of the very unique layout of the land there, you get a 360-degree view of the entire Ariake Sea and the approaches to Nagasaki. If there's any ship approaching, you will see it from Shimabara Castle. It's absolutely perfect. However, building this castle cost a lot of money, and the Matsukura family needed to get that money from somewhere. And this is where they saw a chance for a handy twofer, because they realised that if they decided to charge vast amounts of tax money to the local peasants, and the local peasants caused any trouble, they could murder them because they were Christians. And so what you get during the rule of the Matsukura family is old Matsukura's people keep persecuting the Christians and demanding increasing amounts of money for them and increasing amounts of corvée labour to pay for this castle. And it's very difficult to convey just how big this castle is. If you just imagine the biggest castle you can think of, Shimabara Castle is twice as big as that. They were ripping up megaliths, like prehistoric megaliths from the waterfront all around Nagasaki, and dragging them across the peninsula to use as the foundations for this castle. There are absolutely huge stones in the walls of this castle that are actually prehistoric. It's designed to withstand artillery bombardment. It's designed to be out of range of coastal bombardment. Matsukura envisaged a time when he would build an extra wall, a 10-mile perimeter wall around it, so that the entire town would be the castle of Shimabara. And the shogun, who wasn't Ieyasu by this time, Ieyasu had retired and his son Hidetada was supposedly in charge. He sent a message saying, don't spend too much money on this castle. There's supposed to be no more wars, remember?
Yes, I can imagine that he might be slightly paranoid about this.
Yes, of course he's paranoid. He's absolutely paranoid because there's a long-term plan for Shimabara Castle and there's a long-term plan for the Matsukura family. They don't know if foreign trade is going to go up or down, but if it does go up, they want to be the ideal location for it. And they want to be there receiving all of this potential largesse and trade and making Shimabara the centre of everything. So they really are trying super hard. And by trying super hard, they are taxing the peasants super hard. And there's a point where the taxation that the Matsukura family are exacting goes above 60%. And I think what's worth mentioning here as well is something I haven't brought up yet, which is how bad the weather is.
Oh, yeah.
Because there is Timothy Brooke, the Chinese historian, Timothy Brooke, has this notion of what he calls the 9 sloughs. And these are 9 cataclysmic climate change events that happen in the period from the 1300s to the 1600s. And the very last of those sloughs, the Chongjun Slough, spans 1629 to 1637. And this is a time when there were terrible dust storms in Asia that were causing red rain to fall in other parts of China. There was a mini ice age, which I think even affected, the Thames in London. That's when the Thames froze over. There were crop failures, and then there were famines, and there were floods, and there were diseases. All of these things were happening at this time. So the farmers were having a bad time of it anyway. And then you have the Matsukura family turning up and demanding taxes from them. And when they refuse those taxes, going, everything here smells a bit Christian. Has anyone got a crucifix? And then persecuting these people.
Because at this stage, it's become completely illegal to be a Christian, right?
That's right. There have been various points in history where people are told that they can't be Christians. But as a result of the Okamoto Daihachi incident, actually, which we discussed last time, in 1614, Shimabara is taken away from its previous owners, and all Christians and foreigners are supposed to leave Japan. And this is an incredibly invasive proclamation, which is, for once, taken absolutely seriously. So you've got not just Christians, not just foreigners leaving Japan, but their children have to leave Japan as well. Anyone who has foreign blood, anyone who has more than a certain amount of foreign blood, has to leave Japan. So you have children with one Japanese parent who are forced to go away to Batavia because they're not allowed to stay in Japan anymore. You have corpses being, exhumed from cemeteries because they're foreign corpses. They can't stay in Japanese soil anymore. They have to go as well. It's a really incredibly invasive and pervasive proclamation. And so down in Shimabara, which used to be the heartland of Japanese Christianity, which was one of the first places to proclaim that it was entirely Christian, suddenly everyone's told, no, you're not Christian anymore. And there are various ways that people are forced to display that. One of them is the fumier, the trampling image. They'll bring out an image of the Virgin Mary, and so you have to walk across that, and if you won't walk across it, then we'll execute you. So all kinds of persecutions now being visited upon these people. And the Matsukuras have got a great excuse because they want this money.
And the Matsukuras, I understand it, when they come in with all their retainers. And so all the retainers now have to be paid or have to receive the rice from the peasants. So you've got the taxes to pay for the castle, but then you've also got the taxes just to keep their retainers in the style to which they want to be accustomed.
They do come in with their entourage, but I think what's possibly more important is in fact the exact opposite, which is that they come in with their entourage, but the Arima entourage is still there. So the people that they replace, the lords of Arima, when they left, only a very, very few of them, a couple of suitcases and a toothbrush, and off they went. Most of the Arima servants and retainers and castellans and samurai stayed behind in Shimabara. And so you have the Matsukuras turning up, faced with this huge entourage that they now have to manage, many of whom were walking around wearing crucifixes and saying Hail Marys only a couple of years earlier. And some of them have apostatized, and some of them have said they've apostatized, and some of them haven't apostatized at all.
It still seems like this sort of period of incredible confusion, and at the same time, these Christian priests who've been told they can't come in on pain of execution, they keep trying to sneak back into the country, and usually they're caught in no time at all.
Yes, I mean the supposedly all the priests have left, but the Jesuits in particular are sneaking them in undercover. There are some Jesuit priests that are Japanese, which are relatively easy to hide, but there are also Portuguese priests coming in, sure of being executed if they're caught, administering to this underground movement of Christians. And so what you have along the Amakusa archipelago and in Shimabara itself, you have a population that was once famously Christian and is now performatively not, served by some of these kind of secret agent priests sneaking in, some of whom are caught, and which only makes everyone more paranoid, but also a kind of local clergy of kind of like hedge priests who are developing a frankly very weird version of Christianity, which is already starting to diverge from the Christianity as taught by the Portuguese themselves. I'm sure we're going to get there in the end, but there's a man, for example, called Peter Masuda, who's wandering up and down the Amakusa archipelago with his son, giving what I can only call street performances. He's saying, I'm here to talk about God, but first I'm going to make this dove appear out of my sleeve. And, here I can call down this bird which lays an egg in my hand, and I crack the egg, and inside, is a Christian sutra, which I'm going to read out to you, and it's from the book of Matthew. And so it's this very performative kind of circus act, really, which is not unknown in missionary work of the pre-modern period. I mean, when you hear about the religious contests at the court of Kublai Khan, you hear very similar stories about people doing kind of weird feats of strength and putting, not making balloons pop through glass, but circus act-like performances. And Peter Masuda is doing this all up and down the Amakusa archipelago as well, trying to make Christianity look like this sort of wizardry as a means of getting people to listen to his message.
So I'm slightly confused as to our timeline now, because Christianity has been banned. There's martyrdoms happening, right, left, and center. But the traders are still going. But I know that Sakoku, where they finally closed the country to pretty much everybody, to all Europeans, nobody can leave, nobody can come in. When is that?
It's a series of edicts that start in about 1633 and go all the way through to 1639. But Sakoku means the locked country. And it's basically the Tokugawa shogunate saying, we don't want any foreigners at all that we can't control. So there will be very, very carefully controlled points of entry. The Chinese can come to Hirado. The Dutch can come to Nagasaki, to a little ghetto island there. There's also a couple. The Koreans can go to Tsushima, for example, and I think there's a little port of entry at the top as well for people trading with the Ainu. But basically, as you say, Japan is locked off. Japanese people are not allowed to leave on pain of death. If they do leave Japan, they're not allowed to come back, and foreigners are not allowed to enter Japan either. So Japan is shut down completely, and this is an attempt to stop these Christian missionaries sneaking in. It's much harder to sneak in if there's no kind of trading ship you can stow away on. And it's also designed because the Tokugawa, in a way, came to power as the result of foreign interference. There are all sorts of factors involved, but the fact that the Japanese Civil War was settled to some extent by the arrival of the gun made them think that maybe we didn't want any more foreign interference now. There was an attempt by the Tokugawa, in fact, to get everyone in Japan to give up the gun. They said, we're going to get all the muskets in Japan, we're going to lock them away in castles, we only need them to suppress revolts, and there won't be any of those, will there? So, and basically Japan tries to drag itself into a time warp. It tries to make everything 1603 for the next 250 years. And so it's one of the reasons why, Japan developed such a unique culture, because they were desperately trying to keep away all sort of foreign influences. And as the Sakoku edicts are being put forward, old Matsukura dies, young Matsukura takes over, who's even more zealous than his father in pursuing this. And one of the reasons, it's suggested that one of the reasons the Matsukuras are being so zealous and so careful with their castle is that they are already breaking the rules of Sakoku. They are already supervising secret arrivals of foreign ships, or maybe are unaware that there are foreign ships arriving in their area. The thing is that if you are a foreigner trying to get into Japan, the Amakusa archipelago or Shimabara are the two places you'd probably most be welcomed and hidden by the locals. So this gives the Matsukura even more reason to keep an eye on the Ariake Sea, to keep looking out for these foreign ships. That's what they say to the shogun anyway. It's like, we have to have this big castle because this is the kind of place where the foreigners are going to show up. So we need to be looking for them, don't we? We're not trading with them illegally or anything.
And another thing I find a bit confusing around the revolt is, you talk about these preachers going around doing conjuring tricks to help bring in the flock. So it feels like there's a very Christian feel to it. But then you also talked about the sort of the grinding taxation that's being applied, the climate, which is making it hard to pay the taxes because you can't grow the rice. So at some stage, the whole thing erupts. And I'm just trying to understand, what is this rebellion about? Is it about Christianity? Is it about poverty? Is it about what's going on here?
Well, the confusion that you're experiencing has been an issue for the last 300 years. No one really knows what the rebellion was about. Different interest groups claimed it was about different things. There were a number of incidents in Shimabara which coalesced into a rebellion. It could have been that someone was planning a rebellion already and it kicked off early because of a fight that broke out somewhere else in the peninsula. One of the issues that the Catholic Church has with the canonization of the participants in the Shimabara rebellion is it's never been quite clear how Christian they were. And the Matsukura family certainly played up the fact that they were Christian rebels. They didn't say, we overtaxed them and now they want to kill us. They said, we are trying to run this province and there are Christian insurgents here that we have to deal with. The farmers, meanwhile, who rose up, said we are being unfairly taxed, but also we're Christians. and we're being unfairly taxed because we're Christians. We just want to be Christians again. Please let us be Christians and possibly stop taxing us. Was the kind of the message literally shot out of the castle on arrows during the siege. So there was a fight over tax. There was a farmer's daughter was tortured by a tax collector. Somebody got punched. Then somebody found a Christian image in someone's shack, and that they were worshipping, and he tore it down. And then he got into a fight. And before you knew it, there was a riot that turned into a rebellion somewhere in the domain of the Matsukura family. Once it broke out, it seemed to feed into a general plan for some kind of action that was already existing. There is talk of there being 5 leaders of the Shimabara rebellion, all of them old samurai, old farmers. And the thing about the Shimabara rebellion that is so sort of exciting for me is that you have these samurai warlords saying, oh, there's a bunch of farmers with kind of pitchforks shouting about tax. We'd better send someone down there to deal with them. And they send out, a party of soldiers who come back in pieces, trailing. and they go, what happened? He goes, well, it turns out that these farmers you told us about are all war veterans, and they've all got muskets, and they're all really good shots. So what you get is a tax revolt and some aggrieved Christians protesting about the way they're being treated. I would also like to introduce as Exhibit 27 the fact that the weather is so bad, because it's apocalyptic by this point. They really think that it's the end times. There is a prophecy that gets bandied around at the time of the Shimabara rebellion, which was supposedly issued by one of the Jesuits leaving in 1614, predicting that the year 1638 would be a banner year for Christians. I have my doubts about this prophecy, in that I feel it was a fake that was knocked up in 1637 by the rebels in order to justify what was happening. But their claim was that 25 years earlier, a departing Jesuit had kind of issued this curse, if you like, called the Mirror of the Future. And he said, when 5 by 5 years have passed, Japan will see a remarkable youth, all-knowing without study. See his sign in the sky. In east and west the clouds will burn. Dead trees shall put forth flowers. Men shall wear the cross on their heads, and white flags shall flutter on the sea. Fires engulf fields and mountains, grass and trees, to usher in the return of Christ. So this is now being bandied around the Shimabara Peninsula. And the thing is that there are signs in the sky. There is this huge swamp around Shimabara, which is putting out vast amounts of marsh gas, which creates these St. Elmo's fire effects, which the locals all know is marsh gas, but which the new arrivals don't know. They just think, oh, what are these signs in the sky? The clouds are burning in the east and west because there are these incredible sunsets because of all the dust in the atmosphere. All we're missing is a remarkable youth. Who is this remarkable youth that's being predicted? It's not these 5 old men who are leading the revolt. Luckily, a remarkable youth presents himself in the form of Peter Masuda's son, Amakuso Shiro, also known as Jerome. He's this teenage boy that is suddenly put forward as the leader of the rebellion.
I'm sorry, who is his father?
Peter Masuda. He's this guy who's been going around doing magic tricks.
Right.
And his son, Shiro, has been accompanying him all this time and is quite good at these performances. He supposedly can hypnotize birds. He can make eggs appear in his hands. He can make doves fly towards him. And he really knows a lot about the Bible. And so he is presented to them as this teenage messiah. He goes, we're not being led by 5 old samurai. We are being led by this beautiful teenage boy who knows the Bible backwards and who preaches to us. He is the leader of this revolt.
And yet, when I hear about revolts in history, you're always left with the question, what were they thinking? Because they may be veterans of Osaka Castle or whatever it was, and they may know how to handle a musket, and they may have some old muskets stuck in the thatch. But what chance have they got against the power of the shogunate?
they're not trying to overthrow the state. I mean, they make this very clear in their own pronouncement. They just want fair treatment. As far as they're concerned, fair treatment is freedom of religion, and please stop taxing us quite so much. Some of them genuinely believe that if the shogun found out what the Matsukura family were up to, he would be on the side of the locals. I mean, the Matsukura family are building a castle they shouldn't build in a place they shouldn't build it, and they're funding it by persecuting the locals. So the very basic demands of the revolt are just leave us alone. The degree to which they understand that they're Christian. There have been so many changes in the attitude towards Christianity over the course of the Christian century that I think it's reasonable to think that they think, well, okay, yes, you say you'll kill us if we say that we're Christian, but if we wait 10 minutes, will we be killed, or will we be back to normal again? It's very difficult to predict that. But also, once they are on the run, because I mean their revolt reaches a certain level and then they have to retreat again. Once they're on the run, they proclaim that they are ready to die. They say, okay, well, the world's ending anyway. We'll die here in this fortress if we have to. But we're really holding out for the shogun to come down on our side.
They do make an incredible attack on this vast Shimabara castle, don't they? Which they nearly grab.
I wouldn't say they nearly grabbed it. They certainly managed to hem everybody inside Shimabara Castle.
I thought they managed to grab one of the gates, and
they did grab one of the gates, but nevertheless the castle still stood, and there are 2 walls at Shimabara Castle, so it doesn't mean you're going to get the whole castle by grabbing just the outer perimeter. The castle was going to stand for another month, and the rebels didn't have that kind of time on their hands. So Shimabara Castle was neutralised, but not defeated. They also took a number of other mansions nearby. They sent messengers out to try and reach other sympathisers, which were headed off at the mountain passes to Nagasaki. What was really at issue here is that we had a very local revolt by incredibly accomplished soldiers, which the samurai in charge were not ready for. Under the rules of the Tokugawa shogunate, the nearby provinces were unable to send military assistance. So we had this fantastic situation where in Kumamoto, which is literally in sight of Shimabara Castle, you can see it across the water. There's a guy there, writing his, samurai records, and he hears what he thinks is thunder, and he looks up and he sees the castle's on fire, and he's like, oh dear, that doesn't look good. We should send someone to deal with that. They can't send anyone. They're not allowed to leave their own province without a shogunal authority. So they then have to send a messenger 10 days up to Edo to get an approval from the shogun, which takes 10 days to come back, and then they can send people to help. And so what you have is everybody in the surrounding area, all the samurai who are desperate for a fight, who are absolutely desperate for a battlefield promotion and putting down this rebellion, they're all sending messengers north to Edo, and they're all waiting for the reply to come back. And the trouble is so let's say you're in Kumamoto. When your messenger comes back 20 days later saying, yep, Shogun says it's okay, get in there and deal with those rebels, he is arriving in front of all of the other armies that are coming that have been given the go-ahead in the interim. So the ripple goes all the way out and all the way back again. And every single samurai army that can possibly get there is now fighting to get to Shimabara in time. They're all desperate to get there. So you have this amazing situation where the rebels run for Hara Castle, the old ducal seat of Shimabara, and they blockade themselves in Hara Castle, and then you get a dozen different samurai houses all piling in and occupying the land around it, creating this huge kind of siege situation. And Arima, Naozumi Arima, who was the guy who grew up in Hara Castle, he's one of the last people to arrive, and he can't kind of get into his own land anymore. He's kind of right on the edge, kind of waving at people from the back, because all of these other samurai, the Terezawas and the Nobutsunas and the Kumamoto samurai, they've all piled in and surrounded Hara Castle. And in the middle of Hara Castle, there are 37,000 Christian rebels.
And you mentioned battlefield promotions. I guess there are some battlefield promotions, because I think for quite a long time, the samurai, they beat against Hara Castle pretty much in vain, and they take some pretty heavy losses, don't they?
Yes. Hara Castle, it had been decommissioned as part of the general shogunal, decastling of Japan. but it's a formidable natural site. Anyway, it used to be an island, and it's silted up enough so that it was a bit like St. Michael's Mount. It had this kind of tidal access, which was denied twice a day because the sea would come in. And these days it's completely silted up and it's just part of the land. But it's this very high, craggy plateau. And inside the area of the castle, well, there's not just space for 37,000 people. There's space for wells, and there's several farms there today. So you have this very large area of land. It took me half an hour to walk across it. That's how big the area is. And so you can grow food, and you can pop down into the shallows and kind of fish. And so you could probably be there for quite a long while. So the initial samurai arrive and try to get into a fight with the people in the castle. And even though the rebels are not as well equipped as the samurai, I mean, the rule of thumb is if you are in a defensive position, you're 10 times more effective than the guy who's attacking you. And certainly the rebels prove that. You have a number of samurai desperate to get some kind of victory before the big guns arrive, before Matsudaira arrives, who's been sent as the shogun's main guy. And one particular old samurai arrives, and he goes, "You know what? We could just wait. No one needs to get into a fight. No one needs to die. They're stuck in that castle. It might take a few weeks, but we can just starve them out. We can just wait. There's no reason for anyone to get into a fight." And the samurai then get into a fight about that because the young ones in particular, but also some of the older ones, they're desperate to be the guy who's remembered as having taken the flag at Hara Castle or whatever. And they're absolutely terrified that another group of samurai are going to win all the glory. So yes, there's incredible competition among the samurai around the area regarding how they're going to take this castle. And even though they're supposed to be waiting, and the man who suggests this is then accused of cowardice by his own officers for daring to suggest that you should wait. You've got the samurai from Kumamoto who are close enough they can dig a tunnel under, so they're trying to dig a tunnel under. And then you've got the Arima samurai who are at the back, but who know the land very well, trying to work out if they can get across when the tide's out. And so all these different people are desperately trying to get involved in attacking the castle. And that's before the authorities at Nagasaki decide that what would really help is if they asked the Dutch in.
That's a bit embarrassing.
For the Dutch? Oh, yeah. So you've got the Dutch in Nagasaki. Nagasaki's been locked down.
Well, it's a bit embarrassing for both of them, isn't it? Because it's embarrassing for the Dutch because they're now being asked to attack Christians. And it's a bit embarrassing for the samurai because they're having to rely on a bunch of...
On foreign aid. Absolutely. That's very true. And in fact, the samurai did actually say that. So what you have is in Nagasaki's been locked down. There was this the communication of the rebels across the passes was shut down at the passes by a very proactive samurai lord called Sano, who's an unsung hero of putting down the rebellion because he managed to stop all word of it getting to Nagasaki. There's a massive curfew in Nagasaki. Nagasaki had been very heavily persecuted since the Jesuits lost control of it anyway, but there was always fear that there was a Christian underground there. Suetsugu, the lord of Nagasaki, he goes to Nicholas Kukabaka, the leader of the Dutch, on their little trading island, and he goes, "Now's a really good time for you to demonstrate that whole thing about how you don't care about Christians." and Kukabaka's like, "I'm not quite sure what that means. Unfortunately for you, I've just sent most of our ships away. We've just hit the trade winds and they've all gone off back to Batavia. And so I'm afraid we've only got one ship left in the harbour. What is it you wanted again?" And Suetsugu goes, "I want you to take your guns on that ship of yours and sail off to Shimabara and help attack Hara Castle." And Kukabaka's like, "Well, I could, but we're not really a warship. We're just a little merchant ship." Because you've got cannon on that ship. Take it to Hara Castle. And so Kukabaka very reluctantly, writing letters of apology to his bosses in Batavia, says, "I'm going to have to go off and fire cannons at some Catholics. I hope you don't mind." And because of the shape of the land, it takes a very long time to get to Hara from Nagasaki. It takes several days sailing. He takes as long as he possibly can. It's actually quicker to ride there on a horse than it is to sail there. But he gets there in the end, hoping against hope that by the time he arrives, the siege is lifted. But no, it's still going on. So he sails into into the harbour at Hara, and he goes, "Okay, what do you want me to do?" And they go, "Well, point your guns at the castle and shoot it." And he's like, "It's a very, very high crag, and we've got a ship with cannons on it. What we really need are mortars. We don't have any mortars." And they're like, "Just stop arguing, shoot your cannons." And he's like, "Okay." And the trouble is that to get the angle right, he has to be very, very far away. So he starts shooting his cannons at the castle. The cannons go over the castle and into the camp of the samurai. And the samurai, and then like, you're supposed to be shooting at the castle? He's like, "I can't do it because we're at sea and it's very high. We really need to be on land." And the samurai are like, "Great, bring those cannon things on land and show us how they work." Because the thing is that for all this time, the samurai have never been big on artillery. They've bought guns, they bought muskets from the Portuguese, they've made their own muskets. They have used artillery. They used it at the siege of Osaka. I think even Ieyasu had some artillery at Sekigahara as well. But they've tended never to get involved in it. And I think it's been a kind of a logistical issue. You can't be the samurai who gets off his horse and stands around at the back of the battle with a bunch of peasants loading guns. You've got to be at the front with your sword in your hand. And so I think that no one's prepared to volunteer for the poison chalice of being the artillery guy.
Yeah, I suppose it's harder to integrate artillery into an army, whereas guns, it's just a much better bow.
Yes, I think so, but also I think from an honour point of view, the samurai don't want to be the ones who are not fighting in the front line.
Right.
It would be a demotion to be put in charge of guns somewhere out on a hill somewhere. So as a result, they've really got no experience with artillery. So yes, the Dutch very reluctantly move a whole bunch of guns and stick them down on the shoreline and then start firing at the castle. And they achieve some limited degree of effect against the rebels in the castle. But then, of course, the rebels in the castle are shouting down at the besiegers, "Oh, you need foreign help, do you? All those foreigners that you threw out. You've got some Dutch Christians helping you, have you? Oh, how about that? What kind of samurai needs foreign help to defeat a bunch of peasants?" So that doesn't go very well. And eventually one of the cannons explodes and it kills a Dutch sailor who's loading it. And the samurai regard that as a good enough reason to tell the Dutch it's okay, they can go home now. And they sort of slink off with their tails between their legs into religious history, where they've been pilloried ever since for taking part in this in any way.
It's hard not to feel a little bit sorry for them.
Oh, I mean, Kukabaka's diary has been translated in the 19th century, actually. There was a fantastic, what's it called? There was an academic paper published in the 1800s, translating his letters out of Dutch back to Batavia. And he's incredibly incensed by the whole thing and incredibly embarrassed by it and just caught between a rock and a hard place. He gets into this huge fight in Nagasaki with Suetsugu about it. He goes, "Listen, we're not supposed to be we're traders." And Suetsugu says, "You only talk of your trade. Now's the time for you to show your true loyalties and where they lie. All of this dancing on the trampling image. Let's see you, shoot some rebels." So yeah, Kukabaka doesn't come out of it very well. What choice did he have? They were going to kill him otherwise.
Well, I don't know. I mean, the Dutch haven't been too reluctant to shoot at other Christians from time to time over the years.
You said
it. So after the Dutch have sort of done their worst or their best, and however good it is, how can the rebels hold out? I mean, if there's 37,000 of them, the food must be running out. I mean.
Yeah, I mean, they did everything they could to put on a performance of having plenty of food. I mean, they would wave fresh fish at the besiegers from the battlements because they were catching it in the shallows nearby. When I went to Shimabara, I stayed at an inn nearby, a traditional Japanese inn nearby, which is one of those places where you have this kind of cringeworthy experience where there's a maid comes into your room with the food and sits there watching you eat it, like a stalker. And I got to talking to her and she said, "I know you're here doing castle stuff, so I've actually arranged for you to have guzorni, which is a dish that was eaten by the rebels at Shimabara Castle." And I went, "Oh wow, this is why we do this kind of writers travelling stuff." And so there was a little burner with a broth in it, a very thin broth with some mochi in it and some shellfish and a little bit of fish and some seaweed. And it was very meagre fare, and it was very very kind of unappetizing. But it was fascinating because it was basically siege food. And I said, how do you know what the rebels ate? And she goes, oh, I don't know. And she started laughing and looking out the window. And the reason is because we know what the menu was for the rebels, because the besiegers, in an attempt to find out what their diet was like, started hacking open their corpses to get a look at the contents of their stomach. And so the recipe for guzoni is actually an autopsy report.
Dear God.
So they were aware that the food supplies were running out and that the rebels were getting weaker. 37,000 people is an awfully large number of people to keep alive for weeks on end. And so the rebels were getting very, very weak, and the performance they were putting on the battlements was getting progressively feebler. And there was also unrest within the rebel camp as well, because there were various communications shot out of the castle on arrows, and one of them was from one of the lieutenants of Amakusa Shiro, the leader of this, supposed leader of this rebellion, in which he said, listen, I can arrange a revolt within the castle. If we arrange a certain time when we can all agree, you attack from the outside, I'll start a fight on the inside, and we can end this. So, that was also a sign that there was trouble within the castle, that, even some of the people in the castle were starting to realize they didn't want to be there.
Again, you got this dichotomy, how many of them are die-hard Christians who are ready to go up to heaven with their Lord, and how many of them are now beginning to think, this has all been a terrible mistake.
Yes, there was certainly a division of opinions among the rebels themselves, which is part of the problem that the Catholic Church has with canonization. There was certainly a hardcore of devoted Christians. We actually have a speech supposedly from Jerome Amakusa himself about the position within the castle, which is written in incredibly devout Japanese, peppered with Portuguese accented Latin, about the need for confession and the need for flagellation and the need for salvation and so on. So there's definitely a hardcore of people who are prepared to die for their faith within the castle, and then a bunch of other people who follow them in, and a bunch of people who were caught up in the rebellion, and a bunch of people who said, "Oh, if the food's going to the castle, I better go with you." And so there's a huge question about the degree to which the rebels in the castle were devout when they went in, or devout at the end. Certainly.
So how does it end? Because as I recall, the final battle is a bit farcical, with everybody running to get in long before they're supposed to.
Well, yeah, I mean, various people have these, claims that we'll attack when we feel we're being attacked. But there's who is it in the end who does it? I can't remember. Who was it? The Arima posse in the end who went through the Arima gate. But there was one samurai said, "Oh, I think someone just shot at me. I think we need to charge now." And they all kind of ran up to take the Arima gate, which is a very, very steep hill. I mean, when I was there was a car trying to get up it, and its gears were failing it, trying to get up there.
Gosh.
It's very, very steep. And they managed to get in, broke in through one of the gates, and found that pretty much everyone in the castle was already kind of on the verge of death. I mean, they were all kind of lying around. They'd run out of food some time earlier, and they were slowly starving to death, which is one of the other issues that affects the way that historians talk about the Shimabara rebellion. Because you expect Christian historians to be interested in it, but the Christianity of the besieged people is under question. And you expect military historians to be interested in it, but the military nature of the final battle is questionable, because it's basically a massacre. The samurai come in and they just start stabbing people on the ground, and they work their way through 37,000 people. There is some feeble attempt at resisting them, but the people in the castle have been there for weeks without any food, and so there's not much resistance to be had.
And as I understand it, in order to count, well, I'm a bit confused. In order to count how many people you've killed,
Yes.
Do you cut off the noses? Do you cut off the ears? Or do you cut off the heads? I'm always confused as to the counting system.
I'm not surprised you're confused because it's been deliberately confused by the Japanese themselves. Originally, the idea was that if you were in a battle and you killed someone, you cut off their head and you carried it around with you, and that was how you showed your tally. That's the medieval practice. As technology altered the battlefield so much, suddenly you couldn't carry 40 heads around with you on your horse. So they started cutting off ears or noses. It depends. It depends on the battle. It's normally noses because they can't be duplicated.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a big controversy in Japan that's kind of ongoing right now about the least visited tourist site in Japan, which is a hill in Kyoto called Mimizuka.
Mimi is sounds like ear to me.
Mimi sounds like ear, doesn't it? Mimizuka, which is on the east side of the river in Kyoto. It's a little kind of hillock, and it's made up of all of the noses of the Koreans killed during the invasion of Korea.
Dear God.
And they changed its name to Mimizuka so people wouldn't know there were noses in it. So that's why it's called Ear Hill. That's why you're confused, because it's ears, is it noses? I don't know. And so there's this big issue with the Korean government saying, maybe you should give us our noses back. And the Japanese saying, maybe we should just leave this big hill of body parts where it is and not get involved. And so yes, there's a whole bunch of trophy taking, because once you're assessing who's done the most in the final battle, there are samurai wandering around with like sacks full of bits of people that they say they've executed. Some of whom turned out to be other samurai. They found dead bodies and they just thought, well, we'll take his nose. And who's going to know? We'll take his nose as well. Because it's a huge numbers game at this point. I think even the samurai themselves were a little bit deflated and disappointed by the nature of the battle because they wanted glory, and they're basically butchering people at this point.
Yeah.
And so it all gets kind of swept under the carpet not long afterwards.
What is the aftermath of the battle? Does young Matsukura, presumably he now gets his, she's still got Shimabara Castle, presumably he
is ordered to kill himself for mismanaging everything.
Oh.
Young Matsukura doesn't last very long. It's an incredible embarrassment to the shogunate because, of course, firstly, a nest of Christian rebels has been uncovered. It's taken a huge amount of resources to deal with them. And the samurai have been rather poor at dealing with them as well. They've been bested in combat by a bunch of farmers, as this is how the official record, reads. It takes them weeks and weeks and weeks to take the castle. And when they do take it, it's only because everyone inside is starving. There were plans for the Japanese to invade the Philippines, which were then indefinitely suspended because they took one look at the way people behaved and said, we're just not good enough. We thought we could do it with, X number of thousand people, but we need 10 times as many if we're going to get anywhere, if this is what happens when we run up against a bunch of peasants. So the Shimabara Rebellion certainly put paid to Japan's plans to conquer the rest of Asia, which didn't manifest themselves again for another 300 years. In historical, in kind of alternate reality terms, Japan's pre-World War II expansion into Asia from the 20th century might have happened 300 years earlier if it wasn't for the Shimabara Rebellion. So there's that. Nagasaki was rewarded for its loyalty by being the permanent port of Dutch trade. And the paranoia about Christians would remain very powerful in Japan for the next 250 years. Being a Christian remained a capital offence. Every New Year's Day, people would have to line up at Buddhist temples and stamp on a trampling image to prove they weren't Christians. Every now and then, they would root out a hidden priest administering to secret Christians. Supposedly, they were all killed in the rebellion, but I've given you the numbers already. If there were 300,000 Christians in 1600, and there were 37,000 killed at Hara Castle in 1637, there's 263,000 Christians unaccounted for. Now, some of them apostatized because they weren't that serious anyway. Some of them died, but there are clearly a number of them who were possibly underground, as indeed it turned out they were.
How do we know that they were there?
we know that they were there because 250 years later, after Japan is opened to the rest of the world by the arrival of Commodore Perry and his black ships, we get a trading post in Nagasaki. We get foreigners tolerated suddenly in Nagasaki. And as a result of the unequal treaties they're signing with the Japanese, the foreigners say, well, we need a church, so we're going to have a church in Nagasaki. And the Japanese are like, well, Christianity is a capital offence in Japan. And they said, oh, we're not going to proselytise, we're just going to have a church for ourselves to worship in. So they built this church in Nagasaki. And Father Petitjean is just shutting up shop, not long after the church has been opened. And there are these Japanese women waiting by the door. And he says, what do you want? And they say, are you the priest? Can you just let us know? Are you married? He's like, no, of course I'm not married. I'm a priest. He goes, okay, so you're a Christian priest? He goes, yes. And he goes, okay, we are the same as you. Our hearts are the same as you. Can we see Santa Maria? And he goes, what do you mean? He goes, the woman, the mother of Christ. And he goes, oh, you mean Mary? Yeah. And it turns out that there are kakure Kurishitan, hidden Christians. There's this underground cult, mainly in the islands off Nagasaki, but also dotted around different parts of Japan. And for 250 years, they've been passing on the teachings from the various missionaries by word of mouth. And they have formed this very odd sect that has drifted significantly far away from the way Christianity originally was. And they have these rituals where the words don't mean anything anymore, but you can just see kind of below the surface that they're still using Christian prayers, for example. I mean, I can give you an example if you like. I've got
go for it.
Yeah, I'm somewhere in here we go. They kind of chant like Buddhists, so it's like no. So it's like Patiri no tiri ke senseri ya santimo sentimo no mentua. It doesn't actually mean anything, but you can tell that at some point it was Pater Noster qui es in caelis sanctificetur nomen tuum. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. And so you've got the Lord's Prayer, you've got Hail Mary full of grace, kind of garbled, but still kind of visible there. And they have these kind of tales they tell each other, some of which are Bible tales, some of which are kind of misremembered folk tales that are nevertheless Christian folk tales.
I suppose they can't write anything down, can they? Because it's too dangerous.
They can't write anything down. And when you go to Nagasaki, everyone thinks, okay, well, Nagasaki is famous for the bomb. They've got the bomb park there. It's dominated by this absolutely massive statue of the goddess of mercy, who is clearly actually Mary. So you have these kind of statues of Canon, the goddess of mercy, but really, she happens to be carrying a baby for no reason, and it's really the Virgin Mary. They would make crosses with stones in the ground, with pebbles, and then if someone came along, they just kick them away and the cross would disappear. So they would have these secret meetings. It's kind of basically secret society. And so that's how we know that it endured for all that time. And of course, what happened then is that some of these hidden Christians rejoined the church, said, okay, well, we've got a few things wrong over the years, but we'll do a refresher course and and come back. But some of them just refused because their faith had taken such a different direction that they were no longer really acceptable to the Catholic Church. They said it was okay to have more than one spouse, for example, which was something that Hideyoshi had brought up actually many years before. He said, you know what, if you just let us have more than one spouse, I could probably do this Christian thing. So the hidden Christians are sort of dying out, or are they? Because some of them are still hidden. They sort of figuring they might as well, not hedge their bets. But that's how we know that some of it endured underground, because they were still going 250 years later.
And as far as mainstream Japan is concerned, how does Christianity figure culturally today? Is it thought about at all?
It's a very minor part of Japanese culture. I think there's only 1.5% of Japan now is Christian, and those people are very devout though. But to put that in context, that means there's more Christians in Iraq than there are in Japan. So Japan is very much a Buddhist and Shinto country. Since the war, there's been this explosion of cults that do all kinds of weird forms of Buddhism and Shinto and worshipping all kinds of odd things. But the Christianity is still relatively small part of the Japanese population, and it's still concentrated, surprise, surprise, down in the south where the Jesuits first arrived. Nagasaki was the biggest Christian city in Japan until 1945, when it was reduced in size substantially.
Wonder what happened then.
Yes, I mean, there are conspiracy theorists who say, well, that's the Satanists and the American government trying to destroy all the Christians in Japan. And, the Japanese tend to have white weddings, at a chapel as a sort of performance, but there's no religion attached to it particularly.
Well, they have the priest there, or somebody who looks very like a priest.
Somebody who looks like a priest. It could be Elvis. They don't really do Christianity in any huge form in modern Japan. But there is a fascination with the Christian century, with the idea of a road less travelled. There is a fascination among the Japanese with not only the fact that, for a brief period that, the samurai warlords were walking around wearing crucifixes and reciting Hail Marys, but also with the devotion of the Japanese believers. I mean, you take an author like Shusaku Endo, for example, who wrote Silence and the Samurai. His mother converted to Catholicism when he was 10 years old, so he kind of came along as a plus one. And he spent much of his writing career saying to himself, if you said to me, I'm going to kill you if you say you're a Christian, I'd just say I wasn't a Christian. It wouldn't be that big a deal. And what I don't understand is how people of my own ethnicity who devoted themselves to such a degree to this foreign god that they would be prepared to die for it when it was so unnecessary for them to die for it in his eyes. And so he spent much of his writing career discussing how alien it is to him, this idea that these people in Japan in the 1500s could embrace Christianity with such devotion to the extent that it would cost them their lives. Okay, well, I think that's a good point to leave it. The plan I have is that we can come back, we can talk about the period from the Meiji Restoration, up to the start of the Pacific War, or up to and including the Pacific War, perhaps. So are you game for that? Absolutely, yes. I mean, we talked just now about Father Petitjean and his church. That was the beginning of a whole new set of problems for Japan. Well, maybe we can pick up with Father Petitjean next time. Anyway, Jonathan Clements, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.